We spent the night in his hut, and they spent most of their time preparing and smoking opium. Our Mishmi guide tells us that the aircraft wreck is 6 days' trek to the northeast. That would be up and over this range and over 2 additional ranges behind it. The aircraft wreck is on Tung Pung Mountain, which is at the very headwaters of the Halei River. On the first day out from the village, we encountered extremely poor weather and we had to camp on a little bitty ledge. My tent is on a ledge not much more than 5 foot wide, and there's about a 300-foot drop-off to a roaring jungle river down below. On December 30th, we drove to the town of Sepa and met Tani Bagang. From there, we continued north to the Nishi village of Kese Bagang in Lower Subansiri district. We spent several days at the hut of Tani's brother while we hired porters and gathered supplies for the trek to Lula Mountain. On January 4th, 2011, we reached the crash site on the east aspect of Lula Mountain. The wreckage was located at 10,938 foot. We found the intact tail panel from the aircraft with a still readable partial number. The partial tail number was 2732. After doing much research, I determined that this was in fact serial number 42-73242, also known as Halley's Comet, the aircraft which I had been searching for. The aircraft was flying westbound from Kunming, China to Chabua, India, and sure enough, the wreckage was located on the east aspect of the mountain. What actually caused the plane to crash, we don't know, but we do know that the weather was very poor on that particular day in 1944. The vegetation at that altitude is primarily deciduous trees and a few pine trees and a few juniper. This is above the elevation at which bamboo normally grows. Note how diseased these pine trees are. There's some sort of a parasitic plant that's infecting these trees and causing them to die off. So the vegetation was not exceptionally dense. However, we did encounter a lot of snow cover. We located all 4 engines. We located shoes, uniform remnants, and many human bones. The shoe appears to be somewhat of a dress shoe, like a wingtip. I'm amazed to find this in a combat aircraft, but I have a tendency to believe that some of these airmen wore rather casual clothing while they were flying. They didn't necessarily wear boots, because I've found similar shoes at other aircraft wreckages that I've reached. There's an oxygen mask that was worn by one of the crew members when flying at high altitude. Tani Bagang, in fact, had a handful of human bones at his hut in Kese Bagang. When he told me that, I requested that he return those bones to the crash site, which he agreed to do, so we returned the bones and photographed them at the crash site. To the best of my knowledge, all of the human remains are now at the crash site. Most of the wreckage was in very large sections. There was evidence of fire, but in spite of the fire, there's many large pieces that survived intact. This particular aircraft, known as Halley's Comet, was a sister aircraft of Hot as Hell. Both of these B-24s were flying in formation on that day, January 25, 1944, from Kunming, China to Chabua, India, when they both encountered severe weather over Arunachal Pradesh and they both disappeared. I found Hot as Hell on December 7th, 2006, and now on January 4th, 2011, I find its sister aircraft, Halley's Comet. I visually inspected all these compartments and sometimes used a flashlight to see in the dark areas. The wheel well in this aircraft did not yield any particular numbers that I could find. The wreckage location was on a very steep slope, so with the mud and the snow, you had to hang on to everything to prevent yourself from falling and becoming injured. The trek to Halley's Comet lasted approximately 10 days. This was the last aircraft I reached on this particular expedition. This MIA search expedition lasted 2 months, beginning in mid-November and spanning until mid-January of 2011. I then returned back to my home in Arizona and started researching the different wreckages that I had reached. I've already identified all of the wreckages and have started locating and notifying the family members. I expect to have all the family members located and notified within the next 6 months.